The anime begins with our protagonist, Mamatsuki Shinya, who is having a normal day until his senpai, Yuki, suddenly confesses her feelings to him. The protagonist accepts without hesitation, and the two walk home together after school. It turns out that Yuki noticed Shinya during lunch when his friends were playing a prank on him, and she found him cute when he got upset, which she says was love at first sight. From that moment on, she started secretly following him because she wanted to photograph every moment he looked adorable. Her friend, Norika, is surprised that Yuki has this kind of interest, as she wouldn't stop taking pictures of him in secret and finding out everything about him. Because of this, Yuki knows everything about the protagonist and has nothing to ask him, so she decides to take a picture of him since she remains his #1 fan. Shinya notices this and is surprised, but he simply takes another photo of her, thinking it's her way of breaking the ice. His embarrassed smile gives Yuki the best view she's had so far. On the other hand, Norika is surprised that Yuki is dating the protagonist, but understands the reasons behind his expressiveness and greatly admires it. The next day, Yuki is thrilled to have obtained the straw that the protagonist used, but Norika takes it out of her hands when she sees Yuki licking it, thinking this would be too much even for her. Besides, she's already dating the protagonist, so Norika advises her to quit this bad habit of knowing everything about him, as it might come off as weird. Meanwhile, the protagonist's friend, Rahito, can't believe that the protagonist managed to get such a cute girlfriend before he did. He even starts to think that she might be unattractive or have something wrong with her. He asks their other friend, Shoyuta, who saw them walking home together, but Shoyuta didn't see her face, so he can only describe her as being very loyal, like a dog. Days go by, and everything continues perfectly between the two, but the protagonist is worried that Yuki seems to know things about his daily life that he's never told her before. He always runs into her during breaks, even though their classrooms are nowhere near each other, as she constantly skips classes to see him. Yet, she feels very embarrassed when the protagonist talks to her from afar, as hearing him shout makes her blush. When he speaks to her, she gets tense and never knows what to say. The protagonist thinks he should get closer to her, and just then, it starts raining. He considers it the perfect opportunity to share an umbrella on the way home, but he backs out at the last second because it would be too much, even for him. Yuki realizes that the protagonist is the type who always carries an umbrella, so she leaves hers at home the next day. However, she has classroom cleaning duty, so she leaves school quite late and has to walk home alone. To make matters worse, the rain doesn't stop. She tries to run to the station since it's close by, but her stamina isn't great. Fortunately, the protagonist finds her since he's been searching for her the whole time, which makes her really happy. The protagonist blushes when he sees her clothes are see-through, so he gives her his jacket and they walk home together. This makes Yuki the happiest person in the world because it's a dream come true for her. The next day, Yuki returns his jacket and takes the opportunity to invite him on a date. They meet up over the weekend. Shinya is nervous so much so that he arrives very early, and Yuki is very excited because she can't believe she has the chance to see the protagonist in casual clothes. When they meet, the protagonist asks her where she wants to go, and Yuki wants to go to his house, but decides that would be too fast, so they go to a cafe instead. Yuki knows his tastes perfectly and thinks she knows what he will order, but to her surprise, the protagonist orders things that he supposedly doesn't like, such as unsweetened coffee and less sweet items. She realizes he's trying to appear more grown-up, which she finds adorable. Another day passes, and Yuki is spying on him as usual because it's his birthday. Norika is surprised to see him surrounded by girls, although Yuki doesn't mind because it gives her a view of the protagonist that she really likes. She doesn't find it strange that he's popular, given how cute he is, but she's sad because the gift she had for him was ruined when she nervously bumped into something that morning, smashing the cake she had prepared. Norika tells her to give it to him anyway, as he would probably like it regardless. So Yuki meets up with the protagonist after school and tries to give it to him, but he stops her, saying he supposedly didn't have any gift, and for him, it's more than enough that they hold hands. After doing so, he blushes because he didn't think it through, and Yuki is happy because she gets to see the protagonist blushing up close. The next day, Yuta tells Yuki that the protagonist isn't doing very well in his studies and will probably have to take extra classes during the vacation if things continue like this. He also wonders what she's doing so close to the boys' bathroom. Just then, the protagonist comes out of the bathroom and wonders the same thing. Yuki quickly says that she came to organize a study group for everyone, and the protagonist agrees. Yuta and Yuki high-five, relieved that they've found a way to avoid extra classes. Yuki calls Norika to avoid being the only girl from a different class, but Norika is a bit annoyed because Yuki didn't tell her what they were going to do, knowing she would have refused. Rahito jokingly says it's a surprise to see which girls from the advanced classes are so cute, as he had always thought of those students as being very studious. He's curious about what draws Yuki to the protagonist. She wants to say everything, but to avoid embarrassment, she simply says that the protagonist is pretty cute, which makes their friends laugh because they think so too, especially since he's short. When they get home, the protagonist and Yuki go to the kitchen to prepare drinks and the cake. Yuki tells him that his piece is the one with a heart decoration, which their friends who were spying on them find cheesy. This makes the protagonist nervous, and Yuki likes that. They then go to study, and the protagonist wonders when Yuki and Yuta became so close, which catches Norika's attention. She thinks the protagonist is jealous, which embarrasses him because he doesn't know what it feels like to be jealous, but he admits that it bothers him to see them so close. He doesn't like this feeling because it makes him feel selfish. Night falls, so Yuki and Norika go out to buy ingredients for dinner. Yuki is happy because she thinks she can win over the protagonist even more with her homemade dishes. However, Norika is surprised because what Yuki plans to make is quite simple. Yuki doesn't know much about cooking, so she's unsure which potatoes would be best for the dish. A girl offers her a recommendation, but is surprised that the protagonist's girlfriend isn't used to cooking. Yuki manages to make a good dinner and goes to the Shinya's room under the excuse that she forgot something, but her real intention is to take pictures of his room. She even gets into his bed to smell his scent. The protagonist catches her, making Yuki blush with embarrassment. The protagonist thinks she's a bit odd, which allows Yuki to hide her obsession with him. She even manages to get some affectionate pats from him, so she's happy. The next day, Yuki was happy about everything that had happened and because she was close to collecting 200 photos of the protagonist. However, Norika doesn't think that's something to be happy about. On the other hand, we see that the blonde girl who had helped Yuki is in the same school and is named Rio. She has liked the protagonist for months because he showed her kindness and she joined the tennis club because of him. However, the protagonist left the club after a few days, but she couldn't quit because she was too good to be let go. Still, she grew fond of the protagonist and doesn't intend to let him date Yuki because she doesn't think Yuki is suitable to take care of him. Rio sees him as too fragile and small, so she doesn't believe any girl is right for him. The exams arrive, and on the first day, the protagonist finishes earlier than Yuki, so he goes out for ice cream with Rio and her friends because she had helped him a lot with his exam that day. However, this only leads to him being bombarded with questions, and he ends up regretting inviting them all. The next day, Rio sees people teasing the protagonist for being so small, but she wishes he would stay that way because she finds it perfect. However, after hearing his thoughts about Yuki, she's unsure of her own feelings and starts doubting whether she'd be satisfied if he ended up alone forever. Later, Shinya and Yuki pose to take their first photo together, but the protagonist hugs her, which surprises her, causing her to accidentally drop her phone. However, she doesn't mind, so they take a photo while hugging. The protagonist feels embarrassed, thinking he's being perverted, but Yuki wanted more. She then gets into position to secretly take more photos of him. This time, Rio catches her and asks what she's doing. Yuki explains that she likes to take hidden photos of the protagonist because he shows his purest self when he's with his friends. Rio agrees, saying he always looks adorable when he's with them. Yuki thinks that Rio understands her obsession with the protagonist and tells her all the things she does day after day to learn every little detail about him. This makes Rio realize that the protagonist is dating a stalker. Rio became friends with the protagonist through mutual friends, which allowed her to closely appreciate his cuteness and receive compliments from him about her height, which she despises. Returning to the protagonist, he passes all his exams, and everyone gathers to congratulate him. However, Rio receives a message from Yuki, who wanted to see her after class. She informs the protagonist that they won't be able to leave together. Shinya feels strange about returning alone after such a long time because everything reminds him of Yuki. He is surprised to see her with Rio entering a cafe, as he didn't know they knew each other. It turns out Yuki wanted to ask Rio to let her know when the professor finishes his classes, since the protagonist has swimming the next day, and his teacher always finishes at a different time. Yuki wants to know the exact moment he finishes so she can take a photo of him during the few seconds between when he leaves the locker room and gets into the pool, ensuring she doesn't break any school rules. Rio refuses to try to convince Yuki to stop, but she doesn't think she'll succeed, and is concerned that the protagonist's cuteness will be photographed without his permission. Meanwhile, the protagonist is more worried about what Rio is doing with Yuki that's so important that it makes them ignore him. Yuki then invites the protagonist to leave together, and before seeing him, Norika advises her not to involve Rio in her plans, suggesting that there's no need to make such an effort. Instead, she could just invite him to the beach or the pool to see him in a swimsuit. Yuki goes with this attitude. Before she has a chance, the protagonist asks her what she was doing with Rio, making her realize he is jealous, which makes her blush. The protagonist helps her stop the bleeding, and she sees his masculine side, which excites her even more and makes her completely forget to invite him to the beach. That same night, the protagonist calls Yuki to ask if she can go to the river since everyone is planning to go. Yuki agrees and is excited to hear they're going to the river because she'll get to see him in a swimsuit. This worries Rio, as she can tell from Yuki's excitement what her intentions are. Later, Yuki goes to buy swimsuits with Norika, and they run into Rio. However, Rio is only there to shop for kitchen items, which impresses Yuki because she manages household tasks like cooking all by herself. Yuki is later informed by Norika that Rio lives alone with her father, which is why she takes care of the cooking. Yuki feels embarrassed, thinking she may have been rude to Rio. Nonetheless, she is surprised by how much Norika knows about Rio, and it's because Rio is famous among girls for her masculine appearance. However, this doesn't matter to Yuki, as her focus is solely on the protagonist. The day of the barbecue arrives, and Rahito's brother, Emma, is surprised to see so many girls in the group. Rahito tells him to calm down because he just broke up with his girlfriend and only has the essentials for the barbecue since he broke up with her before she could use them. Emma tells Rahito not to be so hard on him, but is glad that his friends are nicer. Yuzuki is surprised by Yuki, as he expected her to be cute, but she completely exceeded his expectations. This makes the protagonist nervous, so he goes to buy a few things and Yuki accompanies him. However, Emma feels jealous seeing them so happy as a couple. Yuzuki had forgotten a few things in the car, so she asks Emma for the keys. As soon as she steps out, she trips, so Shoyuta accompanies her and treats her wounds. At the same time, Rio was distracted, thinking about her feelings for the protagonist. Meanwhile, Yuki was feeling down because the water was too cold to go in, but that didn't stop her from going to the river with the protagonist. The protagonist notices that she's upset about not being able to swim, and obviously, Yuki can't admit that her plans to see him in a swimsuit were thwarted. So, she says that she had chosen her swimsuit but won't be able to use it. The protagonist becomes nervous upon seeing it, making Yuki feel very embarrassed for showing it to him out of the blue. A few days later, the protagonist gets lost at the festival, and to make matters worse, his phone battery dies. It all started when he met Yuki to go to the festival, and at first, everything seemed to be going well. However, as they walked around, the protagonist realized that Yuki was taking care of everything: food, games, and even accidents. He became distracted, trying to figure out how to make her see him as more than just a child, and ended up being swept away by the crowd. A group of older girls notices him and finds him quite cute, so they want to take him out with them. But Rio's friends spot him and call out to save him. Instead of giving up when they hear he has a girlfriend, the girls want Rio to join them since she seems quite masculine. So, the protagonist and Rio run away. Shinya is surprised to see Rio dressed in men's clothes and immediately explains why she is dressed that way. It turns out her brother Usami was very overprotective and didn't want a group of girls to go out alone so late, so they had no choice but to dress her as a man. With her tan, she looks like a complete boy. Yuzuki is very happy with how things turned out, but the protagonist would have preferred to see her in a yukata, as he thinks it would suit her even better. Usami changes the subject and asks what happened with Yuki. The protagonist explains that they had separated by chance, so everyone goes to look for her, but Rio wonders why she didn't mention that she had Yuki's number. After they separated, Rio texts Yuki to meet up, and Yuki is first surprised by the clothes Rio is wearing. Rio explains the story, but Yuki thinks she should dress more femininely for the person she likes, taking advantage of the summer weather. However, Rio says she has no problem letting him end up with another girl who is more suitable for him, which touches Yuki since her love is unconditional. Rio realizes that she is just as honest as the protagonist, so she asks that this conversation stay between them. Just then, the protagonist arrives, almost tripping, which makes both Yuki and Rio embarrassed. Yuki and Rio are caught up in their own world, and the protagonist wonders when they became such good friends. Days later, the protagonist goes out with his friends and confesses that he feels like Yuki doesn't see him as a man. However, this doesn't surprise his friends, as it seemed quite obvious to them. They also think it's clear that Yuki is deeply in love and likes his cute side. The protagonist didn't want to be seen this way, but his actions are naturally childish. He then asks if kissing Yuki will prove that he is a man. His friends don't take him seriously, causing him to turn red and lie down on the couch, saying he feels very hot. They realize he is actually sick, and unfortunately, Emma can't come to take him to the clinic because he's busy. The protagonist also doesn't want to go, so they text Yuki from his phone with a double meaning, saying he's hot and wants to see her. Yuki runs over when she learns he is sick and has to go alone since Narika is away on a trip and Rio has a tennis match. This gives her the chance to do other things, like take his temperature with her own thermometer and keep it as a treasure, while also getting a closer look at the protagonist's body. Shinya apologizes for the message his friend sent, and Yuki almost tells him that she liked it a lot, as she imagined the protagonist saying it. However, she calms down and simply says it's no problem. To calm herself, she changes the subject and talks about Rahito's family clinic, as she was surprised by how wealthy they are. This makes the protagonist very nervous, and Yuki looks at him, thinking he's adorable. He realizes this and tries to kiss her to prove he's a man, but collapses halfway due to the fever. Yuki sees he has a 39-degree fever and goes to get something cold. The protagonist regrets it, because even if he were well, he wouldn't have dared to kiss her. Meanwhile, Rahito and Shoyuta can't believe the protagonist thought Yuki doesn't see him as a man, as it's impossible given how in love she is. For now, they find it amusing to leave things as they are until he realizes it himself. Returning to Yuki, she sets aside her negative thoughts to take care of the protagonist properly. She goes to prepare some food and, upon returning, notices that he is burning up with fever. The protagonist grabs Yuki's hand, and she realizes it's because he liked the feeling of her cold hand. She stays by his side and ends up falling asleep until nightfall. Shinya wakes up first and sees her, causing Yuki to get nervous and leave quickly as it's getting late. This makes the protagonist blush more than usual, as he had never seen her wake up and still feels the warmth she left in his sheets. He then recalls that he still finds it difficult to call her by her name, even after being teased for not doing so, like Shoyuta, who speaks with complete confidence to Yuzuki despite not being in a relationship. Nevertheless, he turns red, so he asks Yuki for permission to call her by her name, and doing so makes them both nervous, especially the protagonist, who can't handle the nerves when he hears that she likes being called that way. Here is the translation to US English. Days pass until the protagonist recovers from his flu, and to celebrate, everyone goes to the pool. However, Yuki is worried because she has spent all summer eating, so she thinks she has gained weight and that her bikini won't look good. Because of this, she becomes depressed while waiting for the protagonist. He thinks she might be feeling bad because he passed the flu to her. Rahito wonders what they might have done to spread it, but as expected, they hadn't done anything wrong. The protagonist inflates a volleyball in his face, which makes Yuki nervous since the ball contains all his breath. However, due to her nerves, she loses control and sends it flying. Shinya tries to calm her down, seeing that she's very upset, and the only thing that cheers her up is the fact that she can keep the ball as a souvenir. After the pool, everyone splits up to go home, and the protagonist accompanies Yuki alone. Rahito tells him it's his chance to hold her hand, which makes him nervous. Yuki takes his hand, making it worse for him because she always takes the initiative. The protagonist starts to worry because, despite being just a year older, she always acts like the adult. He gathers his courage and stops her before she gets into the car for a ride. This surprises Yuki, as the protagonist has never taken the initiative before, creating an awkward silence. The protagonist is embarrassed, and Yuki asks if he wants to talk about something. He wants to say that he just wants to spend more time with her, but he lacks the courage at the moment, so he says nothing in particular. Yuki seizes the opportunity to hold the protagonist's hand because she wants to check something. She realizes that his hand is robust despite being very gentle. Shinya tells her that it's not just his hand that is manly, he is a man through, and pulls her close as if to kiss her. This makes Yuki blush and her mind goes blank, causing her to spin around until she becomes dizzy in the protagonist's arms. Days later, Norika visits Yuki and notices that she keeps all the things the protagonist gives her, even if they are just food. However, she spots a covered shelf that piques her curiosity. Yuki tells her it contains some of the protagonist's things that she doesn't want anyone else to see. Despite this, Norika is determined to see what's inside, and she is left speechless when she sees the extent of Yuki's obsession. The first thing she does is bring trash bags and tie everything up so tightly that Yuki won't be able to untie it. Norika changes the subject and asks how things are going with the protagonist. This makes Yuki nervous because they've only talked on the phone since the protagonist acted so manly. Now, Yuki feels even more anxious than usual and thinks she might be going crazy with love. When they return to school, Yuki remains shy, which leads to teasing from others, as it seems like they were flirting at school. The protagonist is worried because he hasn't seen her since that afternoon on the swings. Yuki says she had family matters to attend to, so the protagonist calls her later to ask what kind of problems. Yuki can't tell him the real reason, so she says she was feeling down because some things she was collecting were thrown away, which made her sad. However, hearing the protagonist's voice again has lifted her spirits. The next day, Ryo finds Yuki replacing the protagonist's eraser and is surprised by how obsessed Yuki is with his things. From the outside, it seems like Yuki went to talk to Ryo because the protagonist believes they've been good friends since the festival. Meanwhile, Rahito has discovered part of what Yuki does, as he has seen her secretly taking photos due to always being mysteriously close to the protagonist. He discussed this with Norika but knows that Yuki is in love with the protagonist, so he doesn't plan to say anything. Later, Yuki gives the protagonist a photo album she made from their trip to the river, which makes him very happy because he didn't have many photos of himself. Since they didn't take many pictures during the vacation, he invites her to the amusement park for the weekend. They both have a great time, and the protagonist wants to know what attractions interest Yuki, so they go to a haunted house. Shinya isn't afraid of ghosts, but still finds the atmosphere creepy while Yuki is scared. The protagonist stays strong to keep going, but suddenly the lights go out. Yuki becomes even more frightened and clings to the protagonist, which makes him happy because the last time he hugged Yuki, she ran away immediately. When they leave, they find out it was a technical issue in the area, and in the darkness, Yuki accidentally ripped off a button from the protagonist's clothes. She keeps it as a memento and is excited because it's the best possible keepsake. As the protagonist returns, he encounters Ryo, who has already realized that he went on a date with Yuki. Noticing his shirt missing a button, she offers to fix it. They then go to a park where the protagonist shares everything that happened on their date. Ryo doesn't know how to react because they seem so sweet as a couple, but the protagonist wonders why she wanted his button so much. Ryo gives her opinion on their relationship, saying that they don't really know each other well, but she regrets saying this, feeling like she was being intrusive. Shinya tells her not to apologize as it might be true, and is even surprised at how perceptive she is. Although he does think she seems a bit jealous, Ryo gets nervous upon hearing this, but the protagonist meant that she might be jealous of Yuki taking away her friend. This leaves her thinking, as she might indeed be jealous and isn't sure of who exactly. Days later, the protagonist's friends wanted to dress him up as an animal because he is the class representative in the costume contest, and since Yusuke wanted to win, he tells the protagonist that he has to dress up in the most unconventional way possible. The second representative was Ryo, and for her, it was easy to decide, since she only had to be something imposing due to her height, like a vampire, so the protagonist already had to be adorable to contrast. Yuki finds out pretty quickly that the protagonist is the representative of his class, so he explains to her that it was Rahito's fault, since he offered without asking him. The protagonist remembers that Ryo told him that Yuki was afraid to approach him, so he tries to shorten the distance, and as he said, Yuki feels uncomfortable when they get too close, so they both get quite red. The next day, Ryo and the protagonist talk about how lovely Ryo would look in her costume, and Yuki listens, so Ryo worries that she will get jealous and sends the protagonist to explain to her, but she doesn't feel jealous. The protagonist thinks she's just pretending not to look bad, but she really doesn't feel any jealousy, so the protagonist gets a little upset. The day of the contest arrives, and Yuki gets a camera capable of taking photos from afar, as all of Ryo's fans are fighting for the best spots, and she couldn't miss the chance to photograph the protagonist's costume. She keeps this a secret because she didn't want it to be a surprise, which upsets Norika since she had known about it beforehand. The first couples come out, and they all look quite good, but when Ryo and the protagonist appear, Yuki goes wild with the photos, although the fans of Ryo swarm in, making it difficult to get good shots. The result is overwhelming for the protagonist's couple, as victory is almost guaranteed with Ryo. Then, Norika tries to scare Yuki by saying that the protagonist will surely become famous and stop talking to her, but the first thing he does is greet her, so her worries last only a second. The president of the journalism club photographs the winning couple, but she only focuses on Ryo. She wants a photo where both of them look good, so she asks Ryo to pretend she's sucking blood. Ryo apologizes, saying that the president is too intense, so she decides to ignore any requests she doesn't like. Shinya is worried that this might make Yuki jealous, but Yuki is happily taking photos. She gets upset and takes Yuki off the stage to ask her why she isn't jealous. Yuki realizes that Shinya wanted her to show more affection, so both of them turn red. Yuki gathers her courage to make her feelings clear. Shinya stops her at the last second because he wanted to be the one to say it first. He gives it his all and tells her that he loves her, which moves Yuki, who decides to be honest and confess that she really enjoys collecting his things, like the handkerchief he just dropped. The protagonist is left speechless and even thinks he must have heard wrong. The next day, Yuki was very embarrassed about returning to the protagonist, but he said nothing, so she thinks he's an angel. Taking advantage of their early departure, the protagonist takes her to an arcade, as his image of Yuki was of a refined girl who spends her time sewing or cooking. However, she was terrible at these domestic activities, which the protagonist knew, but he was just playing a prank on her. The first thing that catches Yuki's eye is a stuffed toy from a machine, and the protagonist decides to win it for her. Yuki thinks it's because he's very good at these games, but it's quite the opposite, and it took him many attempts to win it, which made it even more valuable. The protagonist tells her that she has no reason to judge him for collecting his things, as he always thinks about her and wonders how clothes or any item would look on Yuki. This touches Yuki, seeing that the protagonist accepts her just as she is, but she's not ready to confess that she stalks him, so she decides to keep that little secret. The next day, Rahito congratulates him for starting to call Yuki by her name, and Usami also gives him a pat on the head. However, Rahito doesn't let him get too carried away, as he doesn't think it's very complicated to do and even demonstrates it. Meanwhile, Yuki is still on cloud 9 even after noon at school, which surprises Norika given how good she is at her studies. At lunch, Yuki prepares the protagonist's meal as a thank you for the stuffed toy. She realizes how much effort she put into it, so he eats it with great enthusiasm. However, he notices that these are his favorite dishes, making him wonder how she knows so much about him. Even so, he can't complain because it's quite pleasant that his girlfriend knows him so well. Later, the protagonist sees Usami's brother talking with Yuki. Rahito seizes the opportunity to make the protagonist jealous, and he pretends that it doesn't bother him, but it's too obvious that he can't stop thinking about what they're doing. However, Rahito is more concerned about Shoyuta, who looks very depressed, and Yuzuka notices this too. Shoyuta tries to calm her with lies, but Yuzuka knows him well enough to see through them. Meanwhile, Yuki continues to spend time with Usami's brother, who is giving her information about the protagonist's schedule in exchange for photos of Usami. Shinya is spying on them because he's worried about their conversation. He sees Usami's brother pat Yuki's head, so he jumps in to take her away because he doesn't like someone doing that to his girlfriend. Yuki explains that he's just a friend, but the protagonist thinks it's inappropriate for a friend to touch her head. Yuki doesn't see anything wrong with it because her friends always touch her head, leaving the protagonist speechless. Winter finally arrives and the final exams are approaching, so Yuki resumes the study sessions at the protagonist's house, putting him under pressure once again. Yuki goes to heat up the food, and Rahito takes the opportunity to tease the protagonist for calling her by her last name again, noting that he hasn't made any progress. Rahito even suggests having a group party for Christmas, which usually involves couples only. He recommends being more forward so they can become closer once and for all, but the protagonist is embarrassed just hearing it. Days later, Yuki goes to Rio for help because she wants to learn how to sew, but she's terrible at it. Rio is surprised that Yuki is making such an effort to give the protagonist a gift, though she realizes Yuki is also doing it for herself, as she'll be able to make plushies of the protagonist and imagine all sorts of things with them. The big day arrives, and the protagonist fails his courses, so he has to attend extra classes, and Yuki catches a cold, preventing her from leaving the house. However, that's the least of his worries because he feels guilty for not taking care of her despite her efforts for that day. Noriko tries to comfort Yuki, but nothing works, so she secretly informs the protagonist to give Yuki a Christmas gift that might make things right. When he arrives, he takes the opportunity to ask why she wanted a group gathering, as it would have been the perfect chance to be with the protagonist. However, Yuki prefers to see the protagonist smile when he's with his friends, as that's what she fell in love with. Noriko leaves because the protagonist is about to arrive, and before she goes, Yuki gives him her handmade gloves, which are a total mess. Nevertheless, he accepts them because he knows how much effort she put into making them and takes on the mission of cheering her up. He becomes nervous upon realizing that she's arriving as a surprise, but it's Yuki who ends up feeling embarrassed, as she's in pajamas and disheveled. Nonetheless, she still wants him to stay by her side. The protagonist gives her his Christmas gift, which makes her very happy, but she also feels down that she doesn't have a gift for him. He then tells her to give him the same gift she gave him for his birthday, which excites Yuki, and she asks him to hold her hand until she falls asleep. Yuki falls asleep within minutes, and the protagonist realizes she must be very tired. As he watches her sleep, he starts thinking about other things, but Yuki moves in her sleep, which brings him back to his senses and makes him retract any indecent thoughts. Days pass, and they have a date where the protagonist seizes the opportunity to ask if she wants to go to the hot springs, as Shoyuta and Yusuke have a relative who can offer them a discount. Yuki couldn't be more excited about going, and the protagonist is happy because he didn't want to go without her. Upon arrival, the first thing Yuki does is check if there's a gap in the hot springs where she can spy on the men's bath, but she's disappointed to find there isn't one. The guys are surprised that she's already showered, and the other girls are also strolling around, but the guys only want to relax. Yuki notices that it's snowing, and the protagonist mentions that he likes snow, which makes Yuki nervous since her name means snow. To keep up, she says she likes it too. She then returns to the hot springs to calm down because she's been in autopilot mode after hearing the protagonist say he likes it. Meanwhile, the other girls gather around the protagonist for a girls' sleepover, with Shinya joining as a special guest despite being a man. Ryo tries to calm them down, as Yuki might get upset seeing him surrounded by so many girls. The protagonist thinks Yuki probably won't get jealous, but Yusuke senses that something is being left unsaid, so he tries to bring it up just as Yuki arrives. She sees them huddled together, contrary to what everyone expected. Yuki pulls out her camera to take pictures because they're both short and it seems like a cute moment, which makes the protagonist upset and he leaves. Yuki is startled and doesn't understand why he's upset, so she goes after him, while the protagonist is thinking that perhaps her feelings aren't the same as his, although he acknowledges he overreacted. Yuki catches up with him and apologizes, even though she doesn't know what she did wrong. They then move to a more private spot to talk. The protagonist wants to explain how he fell in love with her, which makes Yuki very happy, and she confesses that she likes everything about him, from his clothes and scent to his sweat. Yuki fears the protagonist will reject her, but instead, he kisses her on the cheek, making both of them blush. Shinya realizes that Yuki is a stalker, so he decides to be more careful about giving her things that shouldn't be collectible, but he gives her a brooch as a gift in return. After clearing up the misunderstandings, the protagonist knows that although they don't love each other in the same way, they do with the same intensity. Therefore, there's no reason to doubt her as they both love each other. This is where the anime ends. And that's the end of the summary of this wonderful anime. I hope you liked it. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button as it helps and motivates me to keep creating more content for you. See you soon.